theory Conley draws on the theoretical basis of argument for the instrumental value of liberty. It's not intrinsic. Part 2, she offers analysis of particular areas in which limitation of personal liberty might prove especially essential. Before turning, with astonishing brevity, one feels on addressing possible concerns. Okay, the crux of Conley's argument is as follows. Liberty is only valuable as a means. So that's not as an end in itself. On the other hand, freedom in much of the Western philosophy is modern Western philosophy is an end in itself. That's what constitutes your individuality. But so I'm just going to say this before we read what she's saying. But that can still be compatible with Western modernity, because freedom really, the concrete form, when we talk about concrete form of freedom, is capital. So the meaningful limits on liberty are when you put limits on capital. Permanent limits. And that can still be compatible with capitalism, but rejecting capital is what really is required to reject freedom. Okay. So put simply, some liberties have instrumental value. Some. Some. And no liberty has intrinsic value. How is that possible? Okay. Since each liberty is only as sacred as its outcome is useful, we as a polis polity should pick and choose which liberties has value. For a liberty to have instrumental value, according to Conley, it must produce a valuable end. And how are you going to define valuable ends? You must have a conception of an end. It must be best means for reaching the end, and the value of the end that liberty produces must outweigh the disvalue it may also produce. So it's a sort of a cost-benefit analysis of freedom. But it doesn't seem to, at least not until now, it doesn't seem to reject the emphasis on liberty as the main core value, even if it is instrumental value, not intrinsic value. Because after all, freedom, even in liberalism and humanism, you can still argue that at the end of the day, freedom is not an intrinsic value. What's intrinsically valued is the human being or something else, and freedom is required for that. At first glance, this line of reasoning seems to run contrary to popular rhetoric and unexamined political intuition, and which tend to take liberty to be a universal good. And in itself, I mean, in Rawlsian term, you will say it's right, not good, but that doesn't make substantial difference. But Conley argued that if we are thinking carefully about our commitments, we already tend to share her assumption. She thinks that the widespread acceptability of such an assumption becomes especially clear in moments when we imagine liberties coming to conflict with one another. For instance, since a reasonable person wouldn't believe that one's liberty to move about at will extend to walking